Hello, my name is Lee Presser. This is my show. I speak frequently to very interesting people. Some of these conversations are so exciting, so intellectually stimulating, I thought others might like to listen in. This is the reason we started recording Conversation with Lee Presser.
Welcome to Conversation with Lee Presser. Every 2 years, voters elect their U.S. congressman. At the height of its political power, Illinois had 27 representatives in Congress and 29 Electoral College votes. From 1970 to 2016, Illinois has gone from 24 representatives to 18. Based on the 2010 census, the average number of people in a congressional district is 710,767 people. 10 years ago, that number was less than 650,000 people in a district. Since Illinois is growing slower in population relative to the rest of the country, after each census, each congressional district includes more ground. Our guest today is Congressman Mike Bost, a Republican who represents the 12th District. Mr. Bost took that seat on January 6, 2015. His district includes more than 5,000 square miles of 11 counties. He serves on 3 key committees: Agriculture, Veterans Affairs, and Small Business. Prior to his election to Congress, Representative Bost served for 2 decades in the Illinois House of Representatives, rising to the leadership position of House Republican Caucus Chair. Today it's my pleasure to introduce the Congressman from Murphysboro, Illinois, Congressman Mike Bost. Welcome to Conversation.
Thank you. Thank you.
So what do you think about this? Illinois decreasing in political power. At one time, Illinois, Indiana, Ohio, that was the center of the political universe.
That political power is based on population. And the reality is the state of Illinois has went down a path where they are very business unfriendly. What you see is you see more and more people. If you have your children and tried to raise your children in the state of Illinois, I'm lucky. My 3 children are actually stayed close by, except for the time my son was off in the Marine Corps. But most everybody I talk to, their children are having to move away to do the get the jobs that they need. So it's a problem with the state of Illinois. There is no reason why we can't be one of the employment engines of the United States. We have 2 major rivers, and not counting the fact that we have the city of Chicago, each should, and bumping up against St. Louis. All of this combined should bring a tremendous amount of wealth and a tremendous amount of jobs. But unfortunately, we continue to go down the path in the state of Illinois of increased debt and anti-good business practices.
Now, of course, as I said in the introduction, you were for 20 years part of the Illinois legislature.
And I preached that for 20 years.
And I know that you were, except for I think 2 years, in the minority.
Yes, that's true.
So during that 2 years, what did you try to accomplish?
Well, there's a lot of things we got accomplished, matter of fact. If you remember, that was back during the time of the Newt Gingrich contract with America. There were certain goals that were set in place. We had kind of a contract with the state of Illinois, which was coordinated by Lee Daniels and then also Pate Phillip in the Senate, along with Jim Edgar. We moved forward with language. There were 19 items that we moved in the first 16 days, and those included tort reform. They included some business reform. They included education reform for the city of Chicago, welfare reform. All of these things were in there, and here's what we discovered. We discovered that when you move things that fast and do things that need to be done for a long period of time, by the time the election comes around, people forgot you did them if you did them in the first 19 days. So people had forgot. There were other issues they'd moved on to. But when Madigan took back over, slowly and surely, even to the point that when finally Rod Blagojevich came in, they even changed the welfare system back to where it was, went right back to the failed system that we had prior to 1996, or 1995. So these were things we did accomplish. These are things we not only need to accomplish again in the state of Illinois, but we need to set a forward agenda in Washington on where we want to go, regardless of who the chief executive officer is. We in the House, and we've done that, where there's a program called A Better Way, which we're focusing on that deals with key areas.
I was going to say that some of the things that you were talking about for the state of Illinois, the things that you say you accomplished in those 2 years,
right,
sound very familiar as things that are still fresh on the tongues of some of the Republican congressmen
Sure.
today.
Sure.
But and nevertheless, now you're in the majority.
Now we're in the majority.
How do you feel now that you're in the
Well,
majority?
here's one thing that I did find within 3 months, I quit taking the blame for things that the Senate didn't get done. We could only do what we have to do in the House, and we've moved a tremendous amount of things. We were able to, we asked to repeal Obamacare. I have voted 4 times to repeal Obamacare to be replaced with something new that does work and is sensible. Of those 4 times that I voted in the House, 1 time actually got, because of some procedural moves, to the president's desk. It was no surprise that the president vetoed it. You know, when we start talking about some social issues and that, when we started talking about Planned Parenthood, more than 4 times we voted to repeal Planned Parenthood or defund Planned Parenthood out of the House. 1 time we got it to the president's desk through that same procedural move. Now, those are issues that are out there. But let me tell you some real other issues that are out there that we must continue to work on. And let me explain one thing. You mentioned a while ago that I was on the Ag Committee, the Veterans Affairs Committee, and Small Business. Earlier this year, when Paul Ryan moved to the Speaker and dominoes fell in different directions, I was able to trade my position on small business to transportation and infrastructure. But my time as a small business, and then it can also carry on to transportation infrastructure, we have to make sure that we get off the backs of the United States citizens who are out there, who are creating jobs, who are hiring people, who are the entrepreneurs that are out there.
What do you mean by off the backs of? A lot of people don't they hear these phrases,
let me explain.
But they don't understand what it is that the government does that's on the backs that causes businesses not to flourish.
Every agency, whether it is the IRS, whether it is the EPA, whether it's OSHA, all of these, they are in place for certain reasons, and rightfully so. But what happens in the U.S. government that even doesn't happen in the state government is these agencies can write rules based on their agenda, not based on Congress's agenda. They can create these rules to what they claim is implement the overall programs that are necessary to fulfill what their agency is supposed to fulfill. And one of the best examples.
Wait, pause there for just a second. Now, you just said that they're supposed to write rules to fulfill what their agency is supposed to be doing. Congress sets that parameter. What are you supposed to be doing, EPA? What are you supposed to be doing, IRS?
We only set those parameters on their general positions, and when we draft language, they are only able to implement the language as the way they interpret, which is a real problem we have in the federal government. Because if you remember, and this will get a little more technical, but the state of Illinois, along with a majority of the states, have something similar. Well, the state of Illinois, it's called JCAR. It's a Joint Committee on House and Senate Rules. And basically, when the legislature passes a bill, the agency of jurisdiction then implements the rules. Then they come back to a bipartisan, bicameral committee. And that committee, their only job is not to say whether they agreed with the original legislation. It's to say, did they put the rules in place to implement exactly what the legislature passed? All the states, several of the states, a majority of the states have that. U.S. Congress doesn't have that. That's a problem, because then what ends up happening is the only way we stop these agencies when they go off on a tangent of their own of what they believe their mission is. And that's where the problem comes in.
Well, that's what I've been thinking, is that the Congress has been, I mean, Congress used to be very, very jealous of its prerogatives.
You're right.
I've heard that said for decades. And then all of a sudden, Congress stopped being jealous of its prerogatives and has, in the legislation or through lack of oversight, has simply said, yeah, go ahead,
write these rules.
Go ahead, executive branch, Article 2 branch, you do it. Article 1
Lazy
branch, we're just going to sit back and we're not going to do our job, which is the primary job, and what the guys that wrote the Constitution spent all their time on Article 1, very little on 2.
Right. Either by lack of understanding or laziness, that is a fact. That's what's been happening over the years. That's why the first thing that we bring up in a better way, let me explain how this came about.
Okay.
A better way was brought about not by Paul Ryan himself, but by the fact that Paul Ryan made the statement that ever since Newt Gingrich has come in, we've had a strong speaker form of Congress.
Okay.
When he came in, he said, that's not the way I believe it is written or the way it should be. The chairman should have power over their jurisdiction, the chairman of those committees. And the members then should have the power over the chairman as voting members on what they want to advance from those committees. And then the leadership's responsibility is to move that forward with the others that are not in those particular committees. With that, he then formed groups, and this is what he said, we're going to turn it back over to the individual members, and he has. Then with that, though, he said, we're going to come up with some ideas that we need and what we felt we needed to do most, and there's a list of about 6 items. The first one is the Constitution. Not to change the Constitution, but to obey the Constitution, to do our job, what you just described. We want to take the power back. We must take the power back because the power can only remain in the people's hands, and while Congress has the power that they have under the Constitution. Yes, we need our executive branch, but our executive branch should not be, they're equal branches, and they should not be able to write the law or change the law
and then implement it.
And implement it.
Yes.
Same way with our judges and the court systems and the judicial branch.
But there are huge numbers of people in this country who disagree. They have a misunderstanding of what it is a president is. They have a misunderstanding of a president almost as demagogue.
Right, as a dictator.
Right.
And not, but they're not.
I'm looking in the Constitution. The words executive orders do not appear anywhere in the Constitution.
Nor czars.
Nor czars, right. And the idea of an executive order as first promulgated by George Washington, I've looked this up, was I'm running a business here called the United States government, and within this business, kind of like, you know, your brother's trucking company, your brother says, okay, in this circumstance we do this, in this circumstance we do that. And it only affects his company and how that company operates, right? And that was George Washington's idea of an executive order, was to tell people who worked for him, this is what we're doing. These were not orders that were supposed to affect citizens.
His directions would then come by the power given him in the Constitution. Yes. Only that power given him in the Constitution. Right. And all else falls under the Congress and their ability to write law. Now, the problem, the thing that we've seen is, and I think if you study it, you could go back to about Woodrow Wilson with a different idea of, oh no, the executive branch needs to have more power. And it just steadily has occurred. Now, for the people that you say, oh, well, they believe that that's the case, that is not the case. You know, one of the most quoted documents, least read documents, is the Constitution of the United States. In that Constitution, we as the legislative branch create the law. The president, as executive branch, executes the law. Executes. Now, under that scenario, we, the people, have the power. If we continue to give that power to the executive branch, you don't have that power. The executive office has that power, and it's and the dangerous path that we can go down if we don't get it away. So the first section is how and where and why we are should be able to change and correct everything from.
We can do that in legislation.
We are.
You can make those changes. Of course, it would be nice if you could retrofit some of the older laws, but that requires a presidential signature.
Correct.
And presidents don't normally want to shed any of their powers.
I tell you, when a president says they want to give more power back to the Congress is before they're elected. After they're elected, then all of a sudden they want to hold on to that power.
Well, that brings us to, we're going to shift gears
here.
Okay. The nominee of your party is Donald Trump.
That's correct.
Are you one of the people who's going to support your nominee?
Yes, I will support Donald Trump. And let me explain to you. I did not support Donald Trump in the primary. I voted for Kasich. Now let me tell you that by the Kasich doing what Kasich did during the convention, I have a little problem because I think a person's word is their bond, especially whenever we have to work at this level. You need to be honest and straightforward, and if you've made a commitment, you need to stick with that. That being said, not my choice in the primary. But when I look out and weigh out where and how I feel we need to advance as a nation, I believe that Donald Trump will and is that person. You might not like him for certain things that he says. You might even be critical, and sometimes you want to listen very closely to what he actually said and what people think he said. But let me tell you, I think he's headed in the right direction in his choice of VP, because Donald Trump has been very successful in business. He has risen and fallen in business, but the businesses that he's learned over the years to grow and how to grow is, even if he doesn't understand each circumstance of what that business deals with, he finds the people that do. And he surrounds himself with them. And by doing that, he advances what his agenda would be in that company. His agenda in this nation is not wrong. Sensibly securing our borders. But let me also tell you that it takes a little while to describe that it's going to take more than a wall. It actually takes because our members have toured the southern border. We have a wall in Tijuana, they go underneath it. So you have to do more than that. You have to have a good monitoring system. You have to have a sensible control of the border. And why is that? Because it doesn't mean we're not going to let people in at all. But when you have certain members of ISIS that will embed themselves and bring danger to our United States citizens, we're one of the few nations that doesn't have a very, very controlled border, and we should make sure that we have that sensible control.
Now, I want to ask you something.
Okay.
That Donald Trump is accused by his opponents of being a demagogue, somebody who thinks that he can do just what we were talking about, a president who simply orders things to happen, which is interesting because there have been presidents in recent years that have just ordered things to happen,
right,
and they don't seem to have a problem with that. But now because they think that Donald Trump, but will he be allowed by the by the Article 1 branch to do that in his quest to fix the country?
And let me tell you why. The only way is if he gets an agreement with the majority. If he gets an agreement with the majority, and sometimes he might even have to have an agreement, or he would need an agreement of the majority, both the House and the Senate. And our forefathers set it up very, very well that it's not easy to move legislation. You actually have to be united at a level that that's quite often more than a majority level. That being said, the members that I have talked to, now I have not met with Donald myself, the members that I talk to who I respect tremendously, he gives one look as his stage presence, as what everybody is saying, oh boy, that's great, or oh boy, I don't know. But whenever he sits with you one-on-one, it's my understanding from talking to my colleagues that he looks you in the eye, he says, what is your input on this? And quite often he takes that input and goes, you know what, you're right, and you have the experience. And everyone that I've talked to that has sat down with him and talked with him in that way has always come back and go, wow, he's willing to work and it'll be good.
So you have a feeling of trust?
I do have a feeling of trust.
Okay, good. Now, last night was the first night of the Democrat convention, and the Democrats are in the process of choosing. I'm assuming that's going to be Hillary Clinton. I mean, that's what it's supposed to be, and Tim Kaine is supposed to be her vice presidential nominee, and Michelle Obama made this enormous speech that got all kinds of accolades from the press. I mean, this morning they were just like, oh my God, it's like one of these speeches for the ages. But there's a section in here that I wanted to ask you to comment on. Mrs. Obama said during the course of her speech, make no mistake about it, this November when we get to the polls, that is when we are deciding, not Democrat or Republican, not left or right, in this election and every election, it is about who will have the power to shape our children for the next 4 or 8 years of their lives.
A couple thoughts. One, if I have to depend on my president, regardless of who it is, to shape my children, and my government to shape my children, instead of me, a parent, then that's a problem. Let me explain to you that I believe that it is a parent's responsibility to shape their children, both in their faith, both in their work ethics, and in everything that they do in life. The government can hamper that. It can, and we've seen that. And it's a shame because the election is not about the individual that we're putting in the White House. It's the people that put them in the White House. And that's where there's this major confusion. When we have the presidential candidate on the Democrat side of the aisle said, say that you're with me. Sign up online and say that you're with her. Say that you're with her. It's not about being with her or being with him. It's about them being with us, we the people.
Mm-hmm. Well, I was just a little surprised when I heard Mrs. Obama say that. Many of the things that she said I have no problem with, but that particular was like, whoa,
well, let me tell you a difference too. That could be her husband's style that's shining through in their family on how they feel possibly about this nation. Let me tell you that in my freshman orientation, not freshman orientation, actually the first couple weeks, we actually, as freshmen, both Republican and Democrat, went to the West Wing and had a reception where we met with the president. The president came out and spoke, and there was a guy by the name of Bruce Poliquin. And Bruce Poliquin was a freshman Republican, very, very, very exciting guy that just is so excited to be there, never held political office. And he, if you remember at that time, we were looking at the Keystone Pipeline. There were several other issues that we were looking, and we were wanting to work together with both sides of the aisle, and we were moving forward with that legislation. The president spoke, and he was right, I mean, within 3 foot of us, and probably wasn't going to take questions, but instead, Poliquin raised his hands up and goes, oh. And so finally he said, you know, I wasn't going to take questions, but what's up? And he said, this lady right here is, and he introduced her and said, she's a Democrat from such and such. Now I'm a Republican from such and such, and this man over here, he's a Democrat from so and so, and she's a Republican from here. And we're all talking, and these are the things we're wanting to work on. And we want to know, will you work with us to do all we need to do for the American people and advance these things? And one of those was the Keystone Pipeline. And he smiled and smirked, walked away from the podium, and as he's walking away, he said, well, we'll see. See, that's not what this chief executive officer is about. That's when somebody believes that they have that total power that we were talking about a while ago. He's got to give that up. She's got to give that up. Whoever takes that position so that we can work together.
Presidents are not dictators.
That's correct.
They're supposed to be first citizens, not demigods.
That's a big difference, and I think that we need to make sure whoever that person is, that they advance that.
Something local. Let's talk about the NGA.
Oh, let's do.
Disappointed?
Very much. Well, I'm disappointed where we're at right now, but it's not over yet.
Why don't we explain to people what NGA is?
NGA is National Geospatial Mapping. Basically, it is the mapping system that was created after the first Desert War, where Norman Schwarzkopf came back and said, this is crazy, we got this group over here doing one set of mapping, this another, and then they took what was the early NGA, combined all of the warfighters and all other mapping systems into one location, actually two, one east, one west. West is located right now in St. Louis. It's expanding, it's growing, it's something that's going to continue to grow. We had a site location located next to Scott Air Force Base. It was free land, free access, a great savings to the taxpayer. St. Louis had an area that was kind of blighted that they wanted to locate it in. Arguments back and forth, political and everything else, we felt like we had the best site. There was actually some confusion that did occur on one of the, they had to do a impact study, environmental impact study done by the Army Corps of Engineers. Unfortunately, the Army Corps of Engineers, when you read that study, which I guess they thought we wouldn't, actually went to 3 different St. Clair counties, one in Illinois and one in Missouri, and I think one in Minnesota. Don't quote me on that, but I think that's what it was. One of the major concerns was the effect that it would have by placing this site near the Osage River. Now, I don't know if you know St. Clair County, Illinois, but there is no Osage River.
No.
And other concerns that they had.
But let's cut to the chase.
Cut to the chase.
The idea was, according to what I read, that the Obama administration said they wanted to put resources in blighted areas in order to help the people that lived in that area.
Right.
And that was the reason that Slay got the deal, because it was going to help St. Louis more than it was going to help Scott Air Force Base.
Right.
Even though Scott Air Force Base is a primary user.
And when we're talking about our Department of Defense, one of the only mapping facilities that we use to give to our warfighters, that is not where you should make the decision. You should make the decision on where is it best placed to accomplish the mission. Where is it best placed to make sure the mission is carried out to its full extent and continue to be for a long period of time? And where is it most secure that we can make sure that that happens? And that does not qualify in North St. Louis, but it does qualify when it's adjacent to Scott. That is our argument. That's still our argument. We'll see how this pans out.
Well, I agree with you. I'm a former Navy officer, so
all military people on each side of the river agree with that.
And at one time I was stationed, during the first Gulf War, as a matter of fact, I was stationed over there and said, this is crazy, that which is, Scott's a primary user of this, and it should be over there, and there's plenty of room to grow it. If it becomes like really huge, they're not going to have space to expand.
No, they won't have space to expand. And there's another factor that the citizens of St. Louis need to realize too. Not only is there a danger of the people doing the mission on the location of a possible terrorist attack on that facility, but you also want a setback from the private sector, and you don't get that in St. Louis, and that's a very scary fact.
No, you can't really have big distances between the exterior fences. Now we're down to about the last 2 minutes here, so I just wanted to give you the opportunity. If there's something you want to say to folks, I always give this to people, go ahead. One
thing I'd like to say is you and I talked about it, it's a better way. I hope people will go online and it's called betterway.gov and see what we're proposing. It is where the people say, well, what's your ideas? Well, here are our ideas. And understand this, that I want to thank everybody for the opportunity to serve them. Who would have thought that a truck driver's son would be able to have that opportunity to serve in the United States Congress? All the problems and all the concerns we have, remember this, it's still the best nation in the world, probably one of the best nations it's ever been, and we just want to work to try to keep it that way.
Mrs. Obama said the same thing last night.
Well, good.
So,
it's nice to see we agree on a few things.
Exactly. There are areas in which
and we
people
need to make
can agree on
We need
things.
to expand on those places where we agree.
Yes, and so I just want to say that I think that you guys in Congress, you're in a tough position. Some people feel like this country's falling apart. Other people are like, problems? What problems? All I can say is that you're running for re-election.
I am running for re-election.
If you get re-elected and have 2 more years at this, you got a tough row to hoe.
Sure.
I don't care who's elected president.
Well, I always tell everybody that remember your first day you're sworn in, every day thereafter you're sworn at. So
thank you very much.
Thank you for having me on.
And I've been speaking with Congressman Mike Bost. He's from Murphysboro, Illinois. He's actually a freshman congressman in the United States Congress in Washington, D.C. He will be looking, for those who live in the 12th District, he's going to be looking for your vote, so consider that. We're going to be uploading this to YouTube so you can show it to your friends. Thank you. See you next time. Bye-bye.